The room went completely silent when I walked in. Not the polite, professional kind of silence you get when a meeting is about to start. Not the quiet that falls when someone important is about to speak. No. This was something else entirely. This was the silence of recognition. The particular, suffocating quiet that fills a room when someone from your past walks back into your life. Not as the person they once dismissed, not as the woman they ridiculed, not as the desperate applicant they laughed out of a conference room, but as the one holding all the power. I could feel every single eye tracking me as I walked the length of that conference room. The carpet was the same deep charcoal gray. The floor-to-ceiling windows still looked out over the city skyline, cold and glittering, like it had been designed specifically to make you feel small. The long mahogany table still smelled faintly of furniture polish and ambition. Everything was exactly the same, except me. I set my leather portfolio at the head of the table. The head, not the side, not the corner, and I took my time doing it. I could hear someone shift uncomfortably in their seat. I could feel the collective weight of confusion and dawning dread pressing against the air-conditioned silence of that room. I recognized faces. Some of them recognized mine. And I watched, in real time, as the color slowly drained from the face of the man sitting third from the left. Richard Henderson. He'd put on weight since the last time I'd seen him. His hair had thinned at the temples. But those eyes, small, quick, and permanently satisfied with themselves, those were exactly the same. And right now, those eyes were doing something I had never seen them do before. They were afraid. I smoothed my blazer, pulled out my chair, and sat down at the head of that table. I looked at every single person in that room, one by one, slowly, giving each of them exactly 3 seconds of my full attention. Then I folded my hands in front of me, and I let the silence breathe for just a moment longer than was comfortable, because I had earned that moment. I had paid for it in full, in sleepless nights and skipped meals and frozen dinners eaten standing over the kitchen sink at 11:30 at night. In the particular shame of being laughed at in a room full of strangers. In 4 years of grinding, rebuilding, and refusing, absolutely refusing, to let what happened in this building be the last chapter of my story. So yes, I let the silence sit. Then I looked directly at Richard Henderson, and I said, quietly and clearly, "Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Callaway. I've been retained by corporate headquarters to conduct a full operational and personnel audit of this office. Effective immediately, I have complete authority over all staffing decisions at this location." And then, because I could, I smiled. "I want you to stay with me, because this story, my story, doesn't start in that conference room. It starts much earlier than that. It starts in a much smaller room, in a much quieter kind of darkness. And before we get to the victory, you need to understand the weight of what came before it. Because the height of a comeback can only be measured by the depth of the fall. So let's go back to the beginning. My name is Sarah Callaway, and for the first 34 years of my life, I did everything right. I grew up in a middle-class family in Columbus, Ohio. My parents were both educators. My mother taught 3rd grade for 31 years. My father was a high school principal. They were good, steady, sensible people who believed deeply in the power of hard work and education, and they raised me to believe the same. I studied hard, I graduated near the top of my class. I got a full scholarship to Ohio State, where I majored in business administration with a concentration in organizational management. I graduated with honors. I got a job within 2 weeks of graduation at a mid-sized consulting firm, and within 3 years, I had been promoted twice. I was good at what I did, really good. I had a gift for looking at broken systems and seeing exactly where the fractures were. Companies would bring us in when things weren't working, when departments weren't communicating, when costs were bleeding out in places no one had thought to look, when the culture had gone quietly toxic and everyone was too close to it to see the rot. And I would walk in, fresh eyes, no attachment, no agenda, and I would find it. Every time. My senior partners started asking for me by name on the difficult accounts. I was on a track, and the track was pointed up. And then I met Daniel. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Daniel, because honestly, he doesn't deserve the real estate. What I will tell you is that we got married when I was 28, that I loved him, genuinely, completely loved him, and that when I found out I was pregnant with our son, Caleb, I felt like my life was finally perfectly full. What I won't tell you is the specific moment I realized the marriage was over, because that moment belongs to me. What I will tell you is that by the time Caleb was 14 months old, Daniel was gone, and I was alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Cincinnati with a baby, a pile of bills, and a career I had put on pause during the pregnancy that now felt like it belonged to someone else's life. The divorce was civil. There was no screaming, no dramatic scenes. It was actually worse than that. It was just quiet and sad and final. We split what little we had. Daniel paid child support inconsistently. And I stood in my kitchen the morning after he left, Caleb on my hip, and I looked at the stack of mail on the counter, the electric bill, the daycare invoice, the credit card statement. And I said out loud, to no one, to myself, to the walls, okay, figure it out. So I figured it out. If you've ever been a single parent, you know what the next part of this story feels like before I even tell it to you. You know it in your body. The particular exhaustion that isn't just physical, it lives in your bones, in the back of your eyes, in the way you sometimes sit in the parking lot of the grocery store for an extra 5 minutes, because it's the only place where no one needs anything from you. You know the mental math you do constantly, automatically, like background software always running. How much is in the account? How many days until payday? Is this expense essential, or can it wait? If I skip my lunch, I can put that money toward Caleb's new shoes. You know what it feels like to tell your kid you can't go to the birthday party because you can't afford the gift. You know what it feels like to lie awake at 2 in the morning, not because you're worried in some abstract way, but because you've done the math 4 times and it still doesn't add up, and you don't know what you're going to do. I know you know, and if you've ever felt that weight, I want you to hit that like button right now, because this story is for you. This one is ours. I spent the first 6 months after Daniel left doing freelance consulting work, small projects, local businesses, whatever I could find. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't pay like my old job, but it kept the lights on, and it let me be there when Caleb needed me. My mother came to stay for a few months and helped with childcare. I am not too proud to tell you that there were days when her being there was the only reason I was able to function. Pride is a luxury. When you're a single parent, You accept help when it's offered, and you say thank you, and you mean it. But the freelance work wasn't sustainable. I needed a real position, stable salary, benefits, a clear career path. I needed to get back to who I had been before I'd let my career sit idle, before I'd let myself believe that taking care of my family was somehow separate from being a professional. The two things were not in conflict. They were the same. I was the same person. I just needed someone to give me a chance to prove it. I updated my resume. I rewrote my cover letter 15 times until it was exactly right. I reached out to old contacts, rebuilt some bridges, rebuilt my professional online presence, and then I started applying. The first 4 interviews went reasonably well and led nowhere. Standard? That's job searching. You can do everything right and still get a form rejection email 3 weeks later. Fine. Keep going. The 5th interview is the one that changed everything. Not in the way I hoped. In the way that breaks you open and forces you to find out what you're made of. Elite Strategic Partners was, by any measure, an impressive company. Their offices were on the 17th floor of one of downtown Cincinnati's newer glass towers, and the moment I stepped off the elevator, I understood that everything about the space had been designed to communicate a single message. We are serious, we are successful, and you are not automatically welcome here. The reception area had that particular kind of sterile elegance. Low white sofas that somehow looked uncomfortable and expensive at the same time. Abstract art on the walls that cost more than my yearly salary. A receptionist who looked at me with the practiced neutrality of someone trained to make people feel slightly less important than they were. I had dressed carefully that morning. My best blazer, a dark navy one I'd had for 3 years, but kept in excellent condition. Pressed trousers, low heels, professional, polished, appropriate. I'd gotten up at 5:30 to get ready before Caleb woke up, had gotten him fed and dressed, and dropped at my mother's by 7:15, and had driven 40 minutes across town with my resume printed on cream-colored paper in a leather folder I'd borrowed from a friend. I had done everything right. The position I was interviewing for was senior restructuring consultant. Exactly the kind of role I'd been doing before. Exactly the kind of work I was good at. The salary was strong, the benefits were good. And most importantly, it was the kind of position that would let me use my actual brain, my actual skills, the part of me that had been sitting dormant and frustrated for 2 years, while life had demanded everything else. I needed this job. I want to say that desperation doesn't show. I want to tell you that I walked in cool and confident and unreadable, because that's how I would write it if I were writing a movie. But the truth is that desperation has a smell, not a literal one, but something people can sense. And I think on some level, I was carrying it into that room, no matter how straight I held my back. The interview started with 2 junior HR staff members, standard screening, competency questions, behavioral interview format. I knew how to do this in my sleep, and I did it well. They seemed genuinely engaged. I saw them exchange a quick look that I read as positive. One of them said, "Impressively thorough," under her breath, when I walked them through my approach to a particularly complex restructuring case I'd handled in 2019. I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease slightly. And then Richard Henderson walked in. He was the VP of operations, and, I would learn, something of a fixture in the company. The kind of man who had been there long enough that his presence had calcified into a kind of institutional authority that didn't quite match his actual competence. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, broad across the shoulders, with a red-pink complexion and the particular confidence of a man who had never once had to doubt that rooms were built for people like him. He walked in the way some men do, not rushing, not deferential, just taking up exactly as much space as he felt entitled to, which was considerable. He picked up my resume from the table without sitting down, the way you'd pick up a menu at a restaurant you weren't sure you wanted to eat at. He scanned it, and then he looked at me over the top of the paper, and something shifted in his expression. Something I couldn't quite read, but that made the back of my neck go warm. "Sarah Callaway," he said. Not a question, a recitation. "Yes," I said. "Thank you for making time. It says here you took a 2-year gap." He set the resume back down. Still hadn't sat. "I did," I said. "I had a child and..." "Single mother?" The HR woman to my left shifted slightly in her seat. I noticed it. I registered it. I kept my face neutral. "I'm a single parent, yes," I said. "But I want to clarify that the gap in my employment record doesn't reflect a gap in..." "How old is the kid?" He finally sat down, leaned back, crossed his arms. "He's 2, I said. "Almost 3. Richard Henderson made a sound, not quite a laugh, something that lived in the neighborhood of a laugh, a sound that said, "And you think you're here for what, exactly?" "Here's my concern," he said, and there was nothing apologetic in his tone, no softening, no awareness that what he was about to say was in any way inappropriate. "This is a high-demand role. We're talking 60-plus-hour weeks during active projects, travel, sometimes significant travel on short notice. Our consultants are expected to be available, responsive, and fully present, and in my experience..." And here he paused, tilted his head slightly, glanced at my resume again, as though the answer to some private question was written there. "In my experience, single mothers tend to have complications." The room was very quiet. "Complications," I repeated. "Childcare issues, last-minute conflicts. Can't travel because of the kid. Leaves early for school pickups. You understand? It's not a character judgment. It's a practical concern." I looked at him. I kept my face exactly where I needed it to be. I had been in enough professional rooms to know that how you respond in the first 3 seconds of a moment like this determines everything. Explode. And you're the difficult candidate who couldn't handle feedback. Crumble. And you confirm every assumption he's already made. Neither was acceptable. "I understand your concern," I said, "and I can address it directly. My childcare arrangements are stable and covered. I have a support network specifically in place for travel requirements. In my previous role, I maintained a consistent performance record through complex, high-travel projects. I'd be happy to walk you through my project history in detail, if that would be helpful." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he made the sound again. Only this time it was longer. And this time, one of the junior associates across the table made the catastrophic error of smiling at it. "I appreciate the confidence," Henderson said, and his tone had taken on the particular texture of someone managing a situation they find vaguely amusing. "But let me be straight with you, because I think that's the best use of everyone's time. We've had 2 hires in this role in the last 3 years who were, let's say, dealing with significant personal situations. Single parent in one case, difficult divorce in the other. Both times, performance suffered. Both times, we ended up with a problem. He spread his hands flat on the table, a gesture of reasonableness. I'm not saying that's universal. I'm saying it's been our experience. And in a role like this, we need someone who can put the job first. You need someone who can put the job first, I said slowly. That's right. May I ask, what does that mean, specifically? What does putting the job first look like in your definition? He blinked. He hadn't expected me to push back. It means, because I'd argue, I said. Still measured, still controlled, every word precise. That the ability to manage complex competing demands, to operate effectively under significant pressure, to make difficult prioritization decisions, and to deliver consistent results in spite of significant personal challenges. Those aren't disqualifications for a restructuring consultant role. They're the literal job description. There was a beat of silence. And then Richard Henderson laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not a professional acknowledgement, a real laugh, the short, dismissive kind that a man produces when something has amused him that he didn't expect to be amusing. He looked at the associate next to him with an expression that said, "Did you hear that?" And the associate, to his everlasting moral failure, smiled back. Yeah, okay, Henderson said, clicking his pen. I appreciate the reframe. We'll be in touch. We won't be in touch. We both knew that. I drove home in silence. I picked up Caleb from my mother's. He ran to me. That full body, arms wide, completely fearless 2-year-old run. And I scooped him up and held him against my chest and breathed him in. He smelled like graham crackers and baby shampoo and something warm and specific that I can only describe as him. He squirmed and laughed and said, "Mama, Mama, Mama," like it was the best word he knew, and I held on just a little longer than usual. That night, after he was in bed, I sat on the floor of my kitchen with my back against the cabinets, and I let myself feel it. All of it. The humiliation, the anger, the specific, searing indignity of being told that loving my son made me less qualified to do my job. I let the tears come because they needed to, because holding them in would have cost me something I couldn't afford to lose. And then I wiped my face, stood up, made myself a cup of coffee, sat down at my laptop, and went back to work. Because that's what you do. You feel it. You let it be real. And then you get back up. If you've ever been judged for something that had nothing to do with your ability, your age, your gender, your family situation, your background, I need you to subscribe before this story goes any further. Because what comes next is for you. What comes next is proof that the people who write you off are writing themselves a very interesting future. The next 8 months were a study in discipline. I didn't get that job, obviously. I got 3 other rejections that fall, 2 of which I genuinely think I deserved to lose, one of which still stings a little when I think about it. But I kept going. I restructured my approach. I took on 2 significant freelance projects that let me build a concrete, recent portfolio of results. I got certified in 2 additional methodologies I'd been meaning to pursue for years. I networked with intention, not desperation. There's a difference, and it matters. My days looked like this. Up at 5:30. Caleb fed, dressed, and dropped at daycare by 7:15. Work from 7:30 until 5. Pick up Caleb. Dinner, bath, bedtime routine. which was non-negotiable, because that hour of books and songs and made-up stories about a small bear named Gerald, who had adventures in a city made entirely of pillows, was not something I was willing to sacrifice on the altar of professional ambition. My son deserved a mother who showed up for him. Full stop. After Caleb was asleep, back to work until 10, sometimes 11. Saturdays were for Caleb entirely. Sundays I worked in the afternoons during his nap. I was tired in a way that I don't think fully goes away. Even now, looking back, I can feel it. That background hum of exhaustion that becomes the texture of your life rather than a temporary state. But I was also somewhere beneath the tired, alive in a way I hadn't been in a long time. Because I had a direction. Because I was building something. Because every day, even the hard ones, even the ones where the math didn't work, and Caleb was sick, and I had a deadline at midnight, every day I was moving forward. And then, 11 months after the elite strategic partners interview, I got a different kind of call. It came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and a spreadsheet, working on a cost analysis for a mid-size manufacturing client. My phone buzzed, and I almost didn't answer it. I didn't recognize the number, and I had a rule about unknown numbers during work hours, but something made me pick up. "Sarah Callaway?" The voice was crisp, professional, unhurried. "Speaking. This is Margaret Chen. I'm the Director of Talent Strategy at Meridian Group's corporate headquarters." A pause. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Meridian Group. I knew the name. Everyone in my field knew the name. Meridian was one of the largest operational consulting conglomerates in the country. They had 17 regional offices, contracts with Fortune 500 companies, and a reputation for being extraordinarily selective. They were not a company you cold applied to. They were a company that found you. "Not at all," I said, and I was proud of how steady my voice was. "How can I help you?" "I'll get right to the point," she said. "We've been watching your freelance work for the past year. Specifically, your Renfield manufacturing project and the cost restructuring you did for Allied distribution. Both outcomes were exceptional. Frankly, better than what we see from some of our senior team members on similar projects. One of our regional directors flagged your work and suggested we reach out." I put my pen down. I was very still. "I'm flattered," I said. "You should be. We're looking to build out our rapid response restructuring division. We call it the Alpha Team internally. It's a small group. 4 consultants, myself as director, working exclusively on our highest priority accounts. The cases that are too complicated, too politically sensitive, or too urgent for standard deployment. We need someone with your specific profile, someone who can walk into a broken situation and fix it from the inside." My pulse was doing something complicated. I kept my voice even. "Tell me more about the role," I said. She did, and as she talked, I felt something shift in my chest. Not excitement exactly, though it was that too, but something deeper. The feeling of something clicking into place. The feeling of a door opening that had always been meant for you. The conversation lasted 45 minutes. By the end of it, she had invited me to corporate headquarters in Chicago for a full-day interview process the following week. I said yes. I hung up the phone. I sat very quietly for a moment. And then I stood up in my kitchen and I said, again out loud, To no one. To myself. To Caleb's drawing stuck to the refrigerator with alphabet magnets. Okay, here we go. The Chicago interview was unlike anything I'd experienced before. It was rigorous in the best possible way. Not the performative rigor of a company trying to seem important, but the real kind. The kind where you can feel that every question has a purpose, and the people asking them have done this enough to know exactly what they're looking for. I was put through 4 rounds of substantive case analysis. I presented a restructuring proposal I'd developed specifically for the interview. I was challenged, pushed back on, asked to defend my methodology under real pressure. I loved every second of it. 2 days later, Margaret Chen called and offered me the position. The salary was 40% higher than what I'd been making before I left my old firm. There was a relocation package to Chicago. There were benefits. Real benefits. The kind that covered Caleb's pediatrician and my vision and dental without me having to do math every time. There was a signing bonus that allowed me for the first time in 2 years to breathe around money. I accepted, and I cried a little in the car, and then I called my mother, and she cried too. The next 3 years were the making of me. Working at Meridian was the hardest professional experience of my life, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. The work was genuinely difficult. These were not easy cases, not routine engagements, not problems that yielded to standard solutions. These were the situations where a company was hemorrhaging money and couldn't figure out why, where entire departments had become disconnected from their purpose, where leadership was either in denial or in conflict, and the whole thing was quietly collapsing from the inside. We came in when other consultants had tried and failed, or when the situation was too urgent for the normal timeline. I was good at it. I was better than good. I had always had the technical skills, the analytical ability, the methodological knowledge, the capacity to synthesize complex information quickly. But what Meridian gave me was scale and experience, and the particular confidence that comes from having done the hard thing enough times that it stops feeling impossible and starts feeling like your natural habitat. I closed 11 major engagements in 3 years. In 8 of them, Meridian's client satisfaction scores were the highest in the division's history. Margaret Chen told me at my 2nd annual review that I had outperformed every projection they'd had for me when they hired me. She said it matter-of-factly, without excessive fanfare, because she was not a person who performed enthusiasm, which made it land harder, not softer. During those 3 years, I also built a life in Chicago that I was genuinely proud of. Caleb thrived. He started kindergarten in a good school district, made friends, developed a passionate and baffling obsession with dinosaurs that required me to become fluent in paleontology vocabulary I never expected to need. We had a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with a doorman who learned Caleb's name on his 2nd day and always had a high five waiting for him. We had a routine, a real one, stable and warm. We had a life. I was a single mother, and I was one of the best operational restructuring consultants in the country. And both of those things were true at the same time, and they had never, not once, been in conflict. I want you to hear that clearly, because Richard Henderson was wrong. He was always wrong. The thing he thought was a liability was the thing that made me exceptional. Because when you've operated under genuine pressure, not professional pressure, but life pressure. The kind where the stakes are personal and real, and walking around your apartment in footed pajamas, asking for a glass of water. When you've learned to make good decisions in a state of exhaustion, to maintain clarity when you're scared, to stay consistent when everything around you is uncertain, you are equipped for this work in a way that someone who has only ever known the clean, uncomplicated pressure of a career simply is not. My capacity was not diminished by being Caleb's mother. It was built by it, strengthened by it, made sharper and more human and more real by every single hard night of it. I had known this. I had always known this. I had just needed the world to catch up. And in the spring of my 3rd year at Meridian, the world caught up in the most satisfying way imaginable. Margaret Chen called me into her office on a Thursday afternoon in April. I wasn't alarmed. Margaret called me into her office regularly, and our relationship had evolved from director and consultant to something closer to genuine professional partnership. She respected my judgment. I respected her precision. We understood each other. But something was different about that Thursday. She had closed her office door, which she didn't always do. She was holding a manila folder, which she set face down on the desk when I came in. "Sit down, Sarah." I sat. "You know we have 17 regional offices," she said. "Yes." "You know that one of those offices has been significantly underperforming for the past 2 years. Retention issues, a problematic internal culture, missed targets, client complaints." I did know this, actually. It had been mentioned peripherally in a few leadership meetings. "Cincinnati," I said. Something shifted in her expression. The very faint, very controlled version of a smile that was the most expressive Margaret Chen ever got. "Cincinnati," she confirmed. "Elite Strategic Partners. Cincinnati office. They were acquired by Meridian 14 months ago. The acquisition has not gone smoothly. The office continues to operate largely under its old leadership structure, and the results have been..." She paused, in the particular way Margaret paused when she was selecting a word carefully. "Inconsistent. Elite Strategic Partners." The name dropped into the room and settled somewhere in the base of my stomach. "Corporate has decided it's time for a full intervention," Margaret continued. "A complete operational audit, a personnel review, and if necessary, and we believe it will be necessary, significant structural changes, up to and including staffing decisions at the senior level." She pushed the manila folder across the desk toward me. "We want you to lead it," she said. I looked at the folder. I did not open it yet. I looked at Margaret Chen, who was looking back at me with her customary composure, giving no indication of whether she knew the full weight of what she had just handed me. "Margaret," I said, "are you aware that I interviewed at that office 4 years ago?" "I am," she said. "I pulled the records when the assignment came up. I know what happened in that interview." A pause. "That's part of why I'm giving you this one." I opened the folder. The name at the top of the senior personnel roster was exactly where I expected it to be. 3rd from the top. VP of Operations, Richard A. Henderson. I closed the folder. I looked at Margaret. "When do I start?" she said. "Monday." And that is how I found myself on a Monday morning in September, standing at the elevator bank of a glass tower in downtown Cincinnati, with a leather portfolio under my arm, a Meridian corporate authorization letter in my bag, and 4 years of patience about to pay its dividend. I want you to subscribe right now, because we are about to get to the part of the story that I have imagined more times than I am willing to admit. The part that I rehearsed in the car on the drive to Caleb's daycare, in the shower, lying awake at midnight with too much adrenaline and too many feelings. The part where Sarah Callaway walks back into the building that tried to define her and redefines it instead. The lobby security guard called upstairs to announce me. I watched his face as he listened to whoever answered. I could tell, from the slight lift of his eyebrows, that the person upstairs had not been expecting this visit. That was intentional. Meridian's protocol for sensitive personnel reviews was always the same. Minimum advance notice, maximum element of surprise. You don't give a chaotic kitchen time to clean itself up before the health inspector arrives. The elevator opened on the 17th floor, and I stepped out into the same reception area I'd sat in 4 years ago. The same white sofas, the same art. A different receptionist, young, dark-haired, who looked at me with genuine uncertainty. "Miss Callaway?" "That's right," I said. "I'll need a conference room." Of course, Mr. Henderson has asked. "The largest one you have," I said pleasantly. "And please let Mr. Henderson know that I'd like all senior staff assembled in 20 minutes. Thank you." I watched her make the call. I found a chair near the window, set my portfolio in my lap, and looked out over the city I'd grown up 30 miles from. The city where I'd built a marriage and had a son and had it all fall apart and had sat on a kitchen floor and cried and gotten back up. Funny, the places life brings you back to. The conference room they showed me to was the largest one on the floor. Same dark carpet, same floor-to-ceiling windows, same mahogany table. I set my portfolio at the head of the table. I took out my documents. I arranged them in front of me with deliberate calm. And then I stood with my hands folded, and I waited. They came in one by one, and then in small clusters, the way people do when they've been told something unusual is happening, and they're trying to figure out how worried to be. There were 9 senior staff members. I recognized 4 of them from my interview. And then, just before the 20-minute mark, Richard Henderson walked in. He had aged since I'd last seen him. Not dramatically, but enough. Something in his face had settled into heavier lines, a slight loosening around the jaw. He was wearing a good suit, which told me he'd taken the time to dress deliberately after hearing I was here, which told me he'd spent those 20 minutes in something close to a controlled panic. His eyes found me immediately. I watched his face go through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, incredulity, and then something complicated, something that lived between anger and a very specific, unwilling brand of understanding. He knew exactly who I was. The interview 4 years ago had clearly not been forgettable for him either, though I suspected for different reasons than it was unforgettable for me. I waited until everyone had taken their seats. I waited until the room had settled into that particular heavy silence, and then I looked directly at Richard Henderson. "Good morning, everyone," I said. "My name is Sarah Callaway. I'm a senior consultant with Meridian Group's Alpha Division, and I've been authorized by corporate headquarters to conduct a full operational and personnel audit of this office. I have here," I removed the authorization letter from my portfolio and placed it on the table, "documentation from the CEO's office granting me complete authority over staffing decisions at this location, effective immediately and for the duration of this engagement. I paused. I expect full cooperation from everyone in this room. I will be meeting with each of you individually over the next several days. I'll also need access to all operational data, financial records, client satisfaction reports, and HR files going back 36 months. If there are any questions about the scope or authority of this engagement, I would encourage you to direct them to the number listed on this letter. I tapped it once. That's Margaret Chen, Director of Talent Strategy, Corporate Headquarters. Silence. A complete and total airless silence. Good, I said. Let's begin. The audit took 3 weeks. I want to tell you it was dramatic from the first day. Confrontational, filled with escalating tension, building to some kind of cinematic showdown. The truth is more interesting than that, because the truth is that it was methodical. It was professional. It was the work that I was exceptionally good at, applied with surgical precision to a specific situation that I cared about deeply for reasons that were both personal and entirely professional. What I found in those 3 weeks was not surprising. It was, in fact, almost exactly what I had expected to find. The office's culture problem was not a secret. It had been an open secret for years, the kind of thing everyone in the building knew, and no one with power had any interest in changing, because the culture worked very well for the people who set it. It was a culture of exclusion, dressed up as standards. A culture where professionalism meant conformity, where commitment meant performing availability regardless of actual output, and where certain people had long ago decided who belonged in this room and who didn't, and had spent the years since defending that decision. The financial picture was exactly as bad as the metrics had suggested. The office was running 40% over budget in 3 cost categories that had no business being where they were, and those inflated budgets were largely concentrated in surprise, the departments under Richard Henderson's direct oversight. There was a vendor contract that had been renewing automatically for 3 years that was costing the company a significant sum for services that could not be clearly documented. There were 3 senior positions that appeared to function primarily as professional parking spots for people with long tenures and diminishing outputs. And there was the HR file. I want to be careful here, because the specifics of personnel matters are confidential, and I have no interest in exploiting the private circumstances of people whose worst offense was failing to push back on a culture that was already broken when they arrived. But I will say this: the pattern of hiring, promotion, and performance review in that office told a very clear story. The people who were promoted were not, with any statistical consistency, the highest performers. The people who stayed longest were not, with any statistical consistency, the most valuable. The determining factor, as best I could reconstruct from 3 years of data, was something less empirical and more personal. Richard Henderson decided who belonged, and Richard Henderson's definition of belonging had a lot in common with Richard Henderson's definition of himself. I documented everything, carefully, objectively, the way you do when you know that what you're building has to be airtight, because you cannot afford to let anything undermine the integrity of the findings. This was not a personal reckoning. I want to be clear about that, because it mattered to me then, and it matters to me now. This was not revenge dressed up as a business audit. This was a legitimate operational review that happened to reveal a significant and expensive culture problem that happened to be anchored to a specific person. The findings were the findings. They stood on their own. In the second week, I had my individual meeting with Richard Henderson. He came into the smaller conference room where I'd been conducting individual interviews with the quiet energy of a man who had spent 2 weeks preparing for this conversation. He'd put some of that time to good use. He came in with a document, a printed summary of his team's performance metrics, which he set in front of me with the air of someone laying down evidence. "I wanted to make sure you had the full context," he said. His tone was controlled. Professional. The cheer and dismissal were completely gone now, replaced by something more careful, more contained. He had understood, in the 2 weeks since my arrival, that the stakes here were real. "I appreciate that," I said. "Before we get into the data, I want to ask you something." He waited. "Do you remember me?" A pause, the slight tightening around his eyes. Yes. You interviewed here several years ago." 4 years ago, I said. "For the senior restructuring consultant position." "Yes." "Do you remember why you didn't hire me?" The pause this time was longer. We went a different direction. "Mr. Henderson," I said, and my voice was quiet, and my voice was steady, and it contained absolutely everything I had never said out loud in the 4 years since I'd driven home in silence from this building. "I'm not asking for a different reason than the one you gave me. I'm asking if you remembered the reason you gave me." He looked at me. He looked at the table. He looked somewhere that wasn't my face. "You expressed concern about my reliability," I said. "You suggested that being a single mother would create complications that would interfere with my ability to do the job." Silence. In the 3 years since I began working for Meridian, I have led 11 major restructuring engagements. My client satisfaction scores are the highest in my division. I have never missed a deadline. I have never been unavailable for a critical project need. I relocated from Cincinnati to Chicago. I traveled to client sites in 9 different states. I looked at him steadily. My son is now 6 years old. He's in 1st grade. He likes dinosaurs. And he has never, not once, compromised my ability to do my job. Richard Henderson did not say anything. There was nothing to say. We both knew it. "I'm not raising this for personal reasons," I said. "I'm raising it because it is directly relevant to the pattern I have documented in the HR records of this office. A pattern of evaluation criteria that are not empirically connected to performance outcomes, and that have resulted in significant attrition among high-potential employees who did not match a particular informal profile." I set a single page in front of him. "This is a summary of my findings. I'll give you a moment to review it." I watched him read it. I watched the color change in his face, not dramatically, but enough. I watched him process the professional language that described, in precise and documented terms, a culture he had built over many years and assumed was invisible. When he looked up, something in his face had shifted. Some layer of defenses had come down, or maybe just run out of resources. He looked, for the first time since I'd arrived, like a man who understood something about himself that he would have preferred not to understand. "What happens now?" he said. "My recommendations go to corporate headquarters at the end of next week," I said. They'll make the final decisions, but the recommendations are clear. I closed my folder. I looked at him one more time. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Henderson." I stood up and left the room. My final recommendations to Margaret Chen and the corporate team were 47 pages long. They included a complete restructuring of the office's cost centers, a proposed reorganization of 3 departments, the elimination of 2 redundant senior positions, an updated vendor contract framework, and a comprehensive set of HR policy reforms with specific implementation requirements. They also included a personnel assessment section, which I wrote with the same care I gave to every other part of the document, factually, specifically, supported entirely by documented evidence. Richard Henderson's name appeared in that section. I'm not going to tell you exactly what the recommendations said, because I believe in the integrity of a confidential professional process, even when that process ultimately works in my favor. What I will tell you is that Meridian's corporate team accepted the recommendations in full. What I will tell you is that there were significant changes at the Cincinnati office. What I will tell you is that Richard Henderson was no longer VP of Operations at Elite Strategic Partners 6 weeks after I submitted my report. And what I will tell you is this: I did not feel triumphant when I heard that. I want to be honest about that, because the story of who I am and what this experience meant to me requires honesty about what the ending actually felt like. I did not feel vindicated. I did not feel the clean, satisfying pop of a balloon that had been inflating for 4 years. What I felt was quieter than that, and older, and more true. I felt like a person who had done her job very well. I felt like a person who had built something real. I felt like a person who, when the world had given her a chance to prove a point, had proven it in the most unimpeachable way possible. Not with anger, not with drama, not with anything that could be questioned or characterized as personal, but with 47 pages of rigorous, well-documented, professionally delivered truth. That was the victory. Not the outcome, the method. Not what happened to him, but who I had been in the process of making it happen. The fact that I had walked back into that building with my integrity intact, with my skills at full power, with 4 years of growth behind me, and a 6-year-old boy who called my name like it was the best word he knew. That was the real victory. The world had turned, exactly as it always does. I'm going to tell you what I tell Caleb sometimes, on the nights when I sit on the edge of his bed after the dinosaur book is done, and the lights are low, and he gets philosophical the way 6-year-olds sometimes do. He asked me once. He was having a hard week at school. Some kid had said something unkind about something, the specific details already blurred by time. He asked me, "Mama, what do you do when someone thinks bad things about you?" And I thought about that for a moment, really thought about it. "You prove them wrong," I said, "but not for them. For you. You prove them wrong because you know the truth about yourself, and the truth is worth proving." He thought about this very seriously. "What if they never believe you?" "Then you don't need them to," I said. "The proof is for you. The work is for you. What you build is yours. What other people decide to see is their problem, not yours." He nodded like this made complete sense, and then asked me to check for monsters under the bed, and then fell asleep within 4 minutes. But I stayed there in the dark after his breathing slowed, thinking about everything I had just said. about how completely I meant it, about the version of myself who had sat on a different kitchen floor in a different city and cried because a man in an expensive suit had decided that loving my son made me lesser, and about how that woman, that tired, hurt, determined woman, had been so completely right about herself even when she didn't fully know it yet. You cannot let other people write the story of your value. You cannot hand that pen to someone who doesn't know you, doesn't see you, and has already decided who you are before you walked into the room. The pen is yours. The story is yours. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the world gives you the extraordinary gift of being able to write the final chapter in the same room where someone tried to write the first one. I am a single mother. I am one of the best at what I do. I was always both of those things. The only thing that changed was that eventually, the world caught up to what was already true. Your circumstances do not define your capacity. Your history does not determine your future. And the people who laugh at you today are often writing themselves a very interesting tomorrow. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been underestimated, ever been told that your life somehow disqualified you from your dreams, ever sat in a room where someone laughed at the thing that matters most to you, please share this. Not for me, for the person in your life who needs to hear it right now. The person sitting on their own kitchen floor tonight, trying to figure out how to get back up. Tell them, the world turns. It always turns. And when it does, be ready.